Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? I want to make sure.
Yep.
Okay. Welcome to our July webinar. I hope everybody is staying safe and sane. So this month, our presentation will be given by Greg Lund-Chaix on local development best practices. He works at Tag1 Consulting as a senior performance engineer. So hi, Greg. I know you're out there.
Hi, everybody. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Great.
So before we start your wonderful presentation, I kind of want to handle some housekeeping, and kind of most people who attend this know what we do, Drupal for Gov. We are a community of open source advocates, and we're interested in all things open source. So in addition to the webinar, we also have our yearly conference, Drupal GovCon. And this year, due to the COVID pandemic, we will be having it virtual, September 24th through the 25th. We also do the Gov Summit at Drupal GovCon. That was last week. Some of you may have attended that. And we do the global training days. So if you're interested in any other information, please contact us at drupalforgov@gmail.com. And we also are available. We have social media accounts on Twitter and Slack. And if you miss any of the webinars and you are interested in catching up on those, we upload these immediately to YouTube. And they're also available on Drupal Recording Initiative and Drupal's TV curated playlist. And lastly, important information, if you're interested or your company is interested in sponsoring Drupal GovCon, please sign up for the newsletter. I have a URL here, but you can also visit Drupal GovCon for more information. And so this pandemic, although it is not the best, it has also provided opportunities to attend other conferences. So Flyover Camp and Atlanta Drupal Camp will be held online, and their last call for Drupal Camp session submissions is coming up soon. So if you're interested, check it out. And there are also other Drupal events. You have the Colorado Drupal Camp, which will be August 14th through 16th, and I'm assuming that will be virtual. And lastly, the DrupalCon Barcelona, which will be in person in December 8th through the 11th. I'm gonna skip this because I talked about our virtual conference being held September 24th through the 25th. And lastly, let's get started. Let's get to the good stuff. This presentation is using tools and Git workflow best practices to simplify your local development environment. So Greg is a senior performance and infrastructure engineer with Tag Consulting. He is the second all-time leading contributor to the Drupal platform. He specializes in architecting, optimizing.
Not me, my company. Let's make that clear.
Okay, sorry. I was like, wow.
No.
Thank you for clarifying and correcting me. They specialize in architecting, optimizing, securing, and delivering large-scale applications. Greg, it says you specialize in performance security, and DevOps workflows. You are a member of the Drupal Gov infrastructure team since 2016 and a Google Summer of Code mentor from 2016 through 2015. And you currently live in Portland. Thank you, Greg. And I'm gonna hand off the screen sharing to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, hi, everybody. And yeah, welcome to quite literally the middle of the Columbia River in Portland, Oregon. I live on an island in the middle of the river. So yeah, hopefully we won't wash away, but it's summertime, probably won't happen. So thank you very much for that intro. And yeah, so yeah, just to be clear, yeah, Tag1 is one of the companies that kind of collects Drupal core contributors. And so behind Acquia, we're the second leading contributor in aggregate for Tag1 people, not me personally. I actually have very few Because I'm an infrastructure person, I actually have very few bits floating around in Drupal itself. Most of my commits you'll find in the Drupal.org infrastructure instead. So thank you. Yeah, I've done talks similar to this at Drupal GovCon, and that's a conference near and dear to my heart. So if you all can make it to that conference, please do so, because it is a wonderful, wonderful show. And also, I ask that if you have questions, there will be several places, because this talk is kind of in 3 parts. There will be several places where I can pause and kind of talk about and respond to questions and things like that. So please put your questions in chat. It can help if you put a Q : in front of them, because it makes it a little easier to spot among the chit chat. And feel free to pop in and speak up if you don't get your question answered. So we're going to talk. Let me see. Let me get my screen share up. And so, yes, we want to stop that. I didn't realize that was still sharing. Right. So this is a talk I do a lot in person, and it's usually a very interactive one where I ask people to raise their hands and things like that. So I will try to do that. But obviously it's a little harder to do here. So yes, we are here to talk about local development and some of the tools. A little bit. Oops, let's get clicked onto the right window. There we go. So as Nika said, I am a senior performance engineer, which is kind of one of those catch-all titles that we have here on our infrastructure team. I do a lot. I do a lot, everything from DevOps to infrastructure to performance to security. We do a lot of work with organizations where maybe they've grown and they're feeling growing pains. Things like, maybe they had a development team of 1 or 2 people, and then, they were successful, which is a wonderful thing, but it meant that they grew their team to 5 people or 10 people. And they started running into problems where their workflow didn't scale with their team. And so basically, I get to have a lot of fun because I get to come in. Tag1 focuses a lot on auditing and for coming in for an audit for performance or security or workflow, or also the flip side of that, crisis management, where when somebody gets into trouble, they call us, we come in, we help them fix the problem, and then we help them put systems in place to prevent that problem from happening again. And so I'm one of their Tag1's troubleshooters that will drop in when an organization is in trouble and help them straighten out whatever problems they seem to have found themselves in for various reasons. We focus a lot on teaching people to fish. So rather than just coming in, fixing the problem and running away, knowing that they're going to come back to us again, we much prefer to go in, help them fix the problem, and empower the team to fix the problem again and prevent it from happening again. So that's a very important thing, which is why I tend to do talks like this, because this is the kind of thing I do for organizations as well. So we are going to cover, come on, there it goes. Basically 3 basic areas. First one is local development environments, how to run your code and things like that locally on your workstation rather than having to push up to a server to do your development up there. I have something I call the 4 rules, which talk about some 4 basic rules, obviously, for the third piece of the talk is going to be some easy things you can start doing right now with Git that will help you avoid headaches and problems, avoid things like messy merge conflicts and things like that. And so some of these techniques will help you prevent these problems before they happen in the first place. And they're things that don't take a lot of work. They're just a little bit different way of doing something. It's not less work, or it's not more work. It's just different, and it then helps avoid the problems before they become a problem. So first things first. And yes, that is beautiful city of Portland in the background. It looks exactly like that. This picture's from a few years ago, but it looked almost exactly like that last night. So there are a couple of tools that we use a lot right now. ddev and Lando are both excellent tools. They both have some nice integrations with things like Pantheon. I think there's some Acquia integrations as well. I don't have any current Acquia customers, so I haven't worked with that recently. But these are both tools. They're both open source tools. They are completely free to use that you can start using right now to spin up a local development environment. And you don't have to then mess with things like MAMP or running MySQL and Apache and things like that on your own machine directly. It's nice because these are container based. They are generally based on Docker. And so it's a good thing because the containers are then professionally managed. They're the ones that manage the container images, and the containers look very much like what you would see in a production environment out on the real functioning servers. And for me as a DevOps and infrastructure guy, that's a very important thing because for years we've had a problem where something would be fine in development, but because the versions of PHP didn't match, maybe it was, in that days, it was, PHP 5.4 or 5.6 or something like that. Maybe a PHP version didn't match, or a PHP extension didn't exist or existed in one place but not in another. And those inconsistencies always led to problems on deployment, where it worked fine in development, roll it in a deployment, and oh gosh, everything blows up when it gets onto the server. So tools like originally Vagrant, although Vagrant is kind of passing because it's cumbersome. It was a great tool. It was a good bridge, and it was the definite parent of these tools. And so with almost every one of my clients, when I'm working with them on setting up a local development environment, we use one of these tools. And today I'm going to show you a very quick example of how ddev works. This could be a whole presentation in and of itself, and I don't want to tie up all of our time with this, but I would like to show you how easy it is to set up a site with ddev. So pardon me for 1 second while I pop up and switch over. Whoops, that's the wrong window. There's new share. There we go. Let me pop over to my terminal. Okay, so let me make that a little bigger. That's a little small. So I have a very basic, and I do mean very basic, composerized Drupal 8 skeleton here. So this is a checkout of a repo that has pretty much nothing but some placeholder web directories for putting my custom code in, a README, and the composer file for actually building Drupal. So this is this is standard composer workflow. So if I do a composer install, and of course, I can type a gazillion words a minute when nobody's watching me, but as soon as somebody's watching me, I typo everywhere, right? Isn't the way it always works? So this is a pretty standard, boom, there we go. It's, we now have Drupal. If we look, whoops. We can see, yep, look, there it is. There's the vendor stuff. There's the web stuff in there. That's Drupal core, all the goodies. And I will post a link to this repo if you really want it. It's a pretty standard thing. The only change I've made from the recommended core Drupal one is I added Coder and Drush to it. So it's a nice simple template that I use pretty much for starting up new Drupal projects. So now, if I were not using something like ddev, I would need to then set up my Apache and MySQL and all that sort of stuff so that I could have a vhost locally, that I could point to this and have PHP running and MySQL, and that always breaks. It's always a pain. It always takes a lot of work. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to tell ddev to set up. Now ddev's pretty smart. It's going to look at the directory it's in and say, huh, you're in a directory named D4G demo, so I'm betting this is the name of the project we want to use. It does a little poking around and says, it sees a web subdirectory there, so I bet that's your web subdirectory. It's your doc root. And oh, look, it looks like you have Drupal 8 in the side there. Do you want to do Drupal 8? That's it. It's set up. So we just tell ddev to start up the containers. If you have not run ddev before, this will take a couple of minutes because it has to actually pull down the containers. It's nothing compared to what it was like in, say, Vagrant days where you had to pull down, gigabytes worth of image. These containers are quite small, in the, a few megabyte size. And what you'll see is you have a box up and running. Now, let me see if I can, so if I click over, I'll just share over to this. There we go. And we now have a fully functional Drupal site ready to do our thing. So, and that's without doing any configuration at all. I typed 2 commands, and we now have a Drupal site up and running locally. So this is great. This is a useful tool. We can really dive into this more in that there is, let me go back to my, I tell you, this whole switching sharing thing is kind of annoying. There we go. If we look, actually I'll do, what you'll see is there's a config, ddev creates a config file, and this is get ignored, but it doesn't have to be. And the nice thing about this is when you get into larger teams and things like that, maybe you have an infrastructure team or something more complicated, you can actually have, you know, your DevOps and infra people, if they're separate from the developers that are working on this, to come in and customize this to say, oh, hey, you know, we actually need to be running PHP 7.3 in these containers so that the local ddev environment will match what's up on your staging and production servers. So here's an opportunity where we can do a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of customization. Again, this is a bit of a deep dive. I don't want to necessarily go all the way into, but we can check in this config YAML. And then when anybody on the development team or the DevOps team who checks out this repo to work on it, they don't even have to do the ddev config because it's already all pre-configured, and it's pre-configured to match the, say, MariaDB version, you know, MySQL version that you're using in production. So therefore, all they have to do is clone the repo, run ddev start, and they have the boxes up and running. So this is a huge headache saver for a lot of people. And I realize I can talk really fast, and I just covered a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm gonna pause for a moment and see, yes. Would it be required, what would be required to set up a second database for migration purposes? There are a couple of ways to do it, and it depends on whether you need to codify the database setup. In that there is a full-on Docker container that is running MySQL, or actually it's MariaDB in this particular case, but whatever database. You have root on that. So you can create other databases and do whatever you need to do. So it's a little more complicated. Yes, you can do it in the configs because we also have, let me pop up here, there's also a, there's a full Docker Compose in here. So if you have somebody who has the Docker chops, you can go ahead and set this up and have, you know, a second database container even if you really wanted to. But it's entirely possible to set up multiple databases under this structure and have them automatically provisioned. Did that answer your question, Sean? So this is what I love about doing webinars. Oh, how do you move it to production? Oh, okay. Boy, that's a much more complicated. So generally, we would probably be doing that in something like Ansible or Chef or maybe Puppet, SaltStack, you know, in some sort of config management tool. So that one is a much more complicated thing, but it is entirely possible to have Ansible, an Ansible, for example, I use Ansible most, so I'll use that one as an example, but it should work in any of them. Have an Ansible role that would set up the database, and then you could have an inventory that is both for both your local and your upstream dev stage prod servers, and then apply those changes to both locations when you run the config management tool. It's probably possible to do this in this. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because this would apply only to the local environment. So you would probably want to integrate that into your config management for your servers, and then point that config management at your local when you need it to. Excellent. So, and do we have any other questions? And I,
There's one,
while I'm waiting for,
Docker works locally. How do you move it to production? I see a question.
yeah. So that really depends on how you're running your production systems. And this is where you really need to get your infrastructure team involved in this. Because what you can do, and this is something that we're working on with some of our internal clients and actually even our own internal systems, is we're starting to migrate clients into an environment where they're running in, say, Kubernetes. And so the build process and the deployment process is now build a container, push that container into Kubernetes, and then you know, in the cycles. We can use the container images that we're pushing up to production here as well. It gets a little bit complicated because you have a little bit of a chicken and egg thing because the build is based on the code you're writing. But the base container images can be the same base container images that you're using up on your servers can also be used in the ddev config locally.
You have another question. Can I
Yes.
config management to sync content into the database between remote and local? And if not, could you cover how to do that?
Sure. And again, this really depends. That is a little bit less config management and more, yeah, that would probably be a local script. That said, there are several ways to do it. If you're set up with Drush so that you can use Drush command line tools to connect to your upstream, your remote environments, then you can definitely use, you know, stuff like the Drush DB dump tools to pull a DB dump down and then use Drush to, because Drush is pre-installed in ddev, to then run a Drush command to push it into ddev. That said, if you're on a managed platform like Pantheon, I think there are hooks to do this in Acquia, but don't hold me to that because, again, I haven't worked with that in a while, where there are, for both ddev and Lando, where you can tell ddev to authenticate against Pantheon, and then all you have to do is do a ddev Pantheon pull, and it will pull down the files and database from the specified environment on Pantheon, and it will load locally. Generally, it's best practice not to push database and files from local to remote. That's a very rare situation, and almost every platform we work with discourages that because that's a very dangerous thing to do because you can accidentally overwrite production with your local, things like that. So generally, what we see is are kind of two one-way streets. We have a one-way street of code going from local to remote, and a one-way street for data, being the database and files, coming only down from remote to local and never the other way around. It's possible, but definitely not recommended. So it really depends, to get back to your question, as far as syncing content and database. Okay, yeah. So on Acquia, yes. I haven't had a chance to really work on ddev with Acquia recently, but the ddev team is very supportive. They're very open, and they are an open source team, and they are very much a Drupal organization. There are some Drupal core committers working for them. They have a excellent documentation and an excellent Slack channel you can join that is linked from their website. And they are very open to adding modules like this to sync with platform, say like Platform SH or Acquia. So, you know, don't hold me to what's there right now, but it is a very doable thing. Okay. All right. I have a couple other things I want to talk about, so I want to move on for a moment. But if we get to the end and we still have questions about this, we can absolutely come back to it. Okay, I'd like to talk about the 4 rules. And the 4 rules are pretty simple things. And this kind of harkens back to a process called Git Flow or GitHub Flow. There are a few other names for it. what I've done over the years in working with organizations is I've kind of distilled it down even more, because even GitHub Flow can be kind of heavyweight on a small team when you only have a team of, say, 3 or 4 people. It works great in large teams where you have dozens of developers working on, multiple things all at once. But a streamlined, simplified version is probably much better for a smaller team, because GitHub Flow has you go through a lot of process that really doesn't make sense on a small enough team. So rule number 1, never ever do anything on the main or master branch. Always do it on a branch specific, a feature branch, an issue branch, something specific to the work you're doing. This will save you uncounted headaches when you're dealing with merge conflicts and things like that, when you have multiple people working on a repo. Because if everybody's working in a branch, they don't have the ability to affect what you're working on until we reach the point of doing a pull request and merge. There are other reasons, and I'll get into in a minute, but this is kind of, it may seem like really basic stuff that a lot of people think, well, yeah, of course, but you'd be surprised how many organizations I work with where we have 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 developers all working directly on main or master or the primary development branch, rather than a task specific branch, one that is just for the particular feature or issue or whatever that you're working on. And invariably we get conflicts, we get reintroduction of bugs, all these sort of things that really could have been avoided if every developer was working in a issue specific branch. Rule number 2, never ever merge your own code. And this one again seems really simple, and it's one that is so easy to cheat on. Oh, it's only a 1-line change. I just need to get this done so I can move on to other things. So let me just go ahead and merge my, whatever development branch into master and move on. But this, more than any other thing, even if it's just 2 minutes for asking a colleague to say, hey, look at this. Is this okay? If it's okay, merge it. Builds that habit of code review and of openness and of having more than one set of eyes looking at everything. It's saved me so many times. I mean, I've been doing work on this kind of stuff for 25 years, and even last week I had one of my interns review some code that I was working on that was some Ansible code for config management on some production servers, and he caught a typo that would have been disastrous, and it looked fine because it was a 2-line change. And I looked at it because I've been staring at the code for 2 or 3 days as I was working through it and testing it locally. It seemed to work fine, but there was a typo in there that would have applied a change that was meant for development to get pushed to production, and my intern caught that. So, I don't care, whether you're brand new, haven't, only been developing 6 months, or I've been doing this for decades. This will save your butt, I swear to you. So always have somebody else on your team. Just take 2 minutes to look at what you're doing and merge it. This one's become a lot less of an issue in the last couple of years because so many organizations are moving to platforms that don't allow you to do this. Especially in the government space. But, so with things like Kubernetes and containers and, Acquia and Pantheon and Platform and things like that, you can't actually SSH to a server and edit the code anymore. But there are a lot of small organizations, especially nonprofit I work with, that still do this. And so this is something that, again, seems like a no-brainer, but can really save you. The only time changes are made on a server should be via version control. So, you push your changes to Git, and then whatever deployment tool you have, whether it's, logging in manually and doing a Git pull on the server, or, using Jenkins, or whether you're using a CI or whatever those tools is, your tools should be pulling the code onto the server and updating the codes on the server, not a person going in and manually touching it. It's gotten to the point where I rarely actually touch servers, and I'm the one that actually is managing these servers, but I never log into them directly. I'm always logging into them doing doing whatever tasks I need to do, whether it's deploy new code, whether it's deploy new configuration, whatever. I'm always doing that through another tool, and that tool is always codified, and that code itself is being reviewed and pull request, rules 1 and 2. And that removes a huge chunk of the, excuse me for a second, saves times, saves downtime. This more than anything else will save you. Yes, I will get to the code sniffing thing. I'm glad you asked that because I will actually come to that later in the talk, but yes. Rule 4, the main branch, whatever you call it, master, main, whatever. I've been migrating to main, given the connotations of the term master. So always deployable. Just assume that at any given second, whatever is main could be deployed to the server without warning. And that's a good thing to keep in your head. One, because that makes things like continuous integration, continuous deployment much easier. It reduces that friction getting code from dev and test into production. Because everybody, if it's on master, it's on main, it's going to prod. It might as well already assume it is. Means that when you're doing a review of code, yeah, no, don't worry, I'm not dying here. When you're reviewing code that's in a pull request or a merge request, assume that as soon as you hit that merge button, some trigger and push that to production, even if it isn't actually going to do that. And having that mindset means that that sort of quality control mindset starts to spread and looks is more into it into the process, and it will save you from headaches down the road again. You don't ever want to say merge something and then like send out an email to everybody saying don't deploy this until this is ready. Because yeah, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So you want to make sure that when you have, say multi-dependent things, and maybe they're all in separate branches, do those in a way so, maybe merge all of them together into a single branch that is, hot 2014 or whatever. And then when you're ready and everything is done and everything's together, then merge them into the mainline branch. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to come up with inconsistent deployments and things are going to break. So those are the 4 rules. They have aged remarkably well, considering I wrote them the first time about 15 years ago. But and some of the things have changed a little bit, especially the editing on servers. But for the most part, these 4 rules, just kind of keeping them in your head as you go through your day-to-day workflow, make the lives of everybody, especially the infrastructure people, because I admit this is very self-serving on my part. Infra people, when these rules aren't followed, our jobs become exponentially harder because we have unexpected outages. We have, we have reversions. We have, all sorts of, we have merge conflicts. We have all sorts of problems when stuff gets pushed out to stage or production. And goes from the private development environment to a more public environment that is shared. So you will make the people who run your infrastructure much happier if you start working under these rules. And you're going to make yourself happier too, because there are going to be fewer problems. You're going to have better quality going upstream. And, let's face it, having the graybeards on your infrastructure team like you is probably a good thing. Again, I'm biased. So, does anybody have any questions about this before we go into some specific things, including coding and sniffing and linting tools?
I don't know what's going on here.
Okay. Sniffing and linting, yes. Okay. Well, let's move on then. I'm going to get on to my next bit, which will include some of that, and then we can circle back to this at the end for Q&A if we need to. Here's some simple things you can do right now. So let's say I'm working on a feature and I've got a module that I'm working on, okay? And this might be what my workflow every day would look like. I sit down at my desk in the morning, I check out what I'm going to be working on, and the first thing I do is the git pull rebase of main. Now this does a couple, and there are a couple of ways you can do this, and I prefer this one, and I'm going to tell you why. You can omit a git merge you want, and that basically what here is we're thing that everybody else committed to main. This is a good thing because this makes it much less likely that you're going to conflict when you go to back in down the road. Thank you. So I prefer rebasing to merging for a couple of reasons. A git merge adds a merge commit. So it clutters up your history, which, oh, am I breaking up? Yeah, okay. Hopefully that's a minor thing. Hopefully it'll come back. Am I okay now? All right, so hopefully it was an intermittent thing. So the reason I prefer pull to, or a pull rebase to, is the pull rebase does not make a merge commit. What a pull rebase technically does is rewinds back to the point where you diverged from main, pulls it forward, sequentially applying all of the commits that have made since you broke away, and then reapplying your changes on top. Okay, hopefully this sticks with us. Yeah, the joys of living on an island, there's only one cable going out. Let's hope it sticks with us here. So the rebase basically forwarding your start point to the point of where main is right now. And because it doesn't clutter up, it makes things a lot easier. The other nice thing about it is when you do it, if the rebase runs into a problem, you get to fix it internally locally, which means more than likely you're going to fix any sort of merge conflicts that you're likely to see before they ever even get seen by anybody else. So it makes it good, right? It means every time if you do a rebase, if you regularly rebase your feature branch or your issue branch from, oh, I just realized I typoed something there. Anyway, if you're regularly pulling from main and rebasing, your pull requests are going to look much cleaner, and you're going to look good to your coworkers because you're going to have a nice clean, and you're never going to get, well, never. Okay, I won't say that. You will much more rarely get merge conflicts upon doing a pull request. So one of the other things you'll notice here is, okay, so every morning when I sit down at my desk, I check out the branch I'm working on, I immediately do a rebase origin main or origin whatever to pull in everything everybody else has done in the last couple of days. Then I go ahead and do my work for the day because 99.9% of the time that pull does absolutely nothing because they're all working on other stuff other than what I'm working on. I then go ahead and do my work, I commit it. Before I push it, I just do another pull real quick in case somebody's done something since the last time, since as I work through the day, maybe, another pull request has been merged since then that would affect my code. Doing another pull right before I push can help avoid problems down the road. And it's something that usually is a no-op, usually nothing's gonna happen, or at worst, something's gonna get pulled in somewhere else in your code, and then you can just go ahead and push your feature branch and off you go. So before I go on to the next step, does anybody have any questions about the difference between rebasing and merging, and as far as why that's a benefit? Okay. We can come back to it at the end here if somebody else has questions. So one thing you noticed, maybe, when I had my terminal up, is I have a fancy prompt. You would be amazed how much and how many headaches this prompt has saved me. There are a couple of things here, and the links here are to a Git focused prompt that is actually part of Git, so it's available in the Git source. It was actually written by a friend of mine at Google named Sean Pierce, who sadly is no longer with us. But that first link creates that little main in parentheses at the end of my prompt, and that tells me a number of things that are incredibly useful. One, it tells me what branch I'm on. So right now, as you can see on the little screen snap there, I'm working on main, which means, of course, yes, I just rule number one. The second thing it does is you see the little red % sign on there. That means my repo is dirty. There are untracked changes in the repo. Actually, more importantly, there are untracked files in the repo. So that % sign means there's something in my repo that has not been added to Git yet. So then, as you see, as I stepped through these, so I made a change to the README. After I made a change to the README, the prompt updated. Shows me a little red asterisk. That little red asterisk is an indication that I have changes somewhere in my repo. That it's essentially a one character indication there's a git diff to be done. So there is a change floating around in the repo.
Ah, lovely.
Adobo and Sozon. Good.
So, and then as you will see, when I do a git add, that little red star turns into a green plus. Let's see, somebody has audio up.
Yeah, I think Sarah's phone.
There we go. I got it.
Thank you.
Got it. Okay. So by doing a git add, that asterisk changed to a plus. The little green plus is telling me I have staged changes that have not yet been committed. And when I do a git commit, that little plus goes away. Now, in one way, this is not, this little example isn't the best, because ideally, I should just see main with nothing in red after it. Because that little red is telling me I have a dirty repo. There are things floating around in my repo that aren't tracked, which means there's a potential that either I forgot to add a file, maybe there's a dependency that exists in my local that doesn't exist upstream, something like that. So whenever, and one of the real benefits of having a prompt like this is that whenever you're working and you see you're a red or a red % or a red asterisk or a green plus, that means there's stuff still needed to be done. The ideal state when you do a git push should be, you should see nothing but your branch name in green and nothing else. And so that will save you some headaches, because it is a nice visual indicator of, hey, you sure you haven't forgotten something there? Or hey, you realize you're working on main, you probably shouldn't be there. You should probably be over somewhere else. The second piece of the prompt is that local at the beginning. And this is less of an issue now, but I find it still a very useful tool. And this tool, what this does, and the second link there is the is a link to the script, and it actually has some integrated git prompt stuff. So the second link expects to see git prompt floating around somewhere, and you'll probably need to modify it slightly. But these are designed to work in Bash or ZSH or whatever command line you're on. And what it does, among other things, is it looks at your environment and puts a tag right there on every single prompt that tells you where you are. It tells you, are you on a local machine? Or, because I also push this prompt out to all the servers that I work on. So when I've SSH'd into a server, or maybe if I'm working in ddev and maybe I've Docker exec'd my way into a shell on the container, the prompt will then, although the prompt isn't necessarily in the container, but then again, even the lack of the prompt is a visual cue to me that, hey, you do realize you're not on your local. And I've done some things with color coding. So, staging, instead of local, it'll say stage, be in, and then if I'm on a production server, it'll be in red. And so there's some ways that, these prompts can provide you with feedback on where you are and what you're doing to help you from yourself and help you prevent making mistakes because you forgot where you were or you forgot something like that. I'm going to pause for a second because I see a couple of questions. Is it possible for some team members to do a rebase and others merge? Yes. It's best to be consistent, so everybody uses the same one, but the only real difference from a workflow standpoint for people other than the person doing, say, a merge, is they'll see the merge commits. So it's entirely possible that if somebody prefers doing a merge, that's fine. They may hear a little grumbling. I've had this on me because I used to use merge myself. I had people say, you know, use rebase instead because I'm tired of looking at all these merge commits. But yeah, you can do either. That it's not important. Oh, yep, we got the answer. Okay, excellent. So any other questions real quick? I mean, this one is, you know, this is pretty simple. The links are here. You're welcome to use either of them if you want, or don't. Laugh in my face. I don't really care. Okay, code sniffing. So it helps that yeah, I'm a fan of the coder module. Doug Green, who wrote it, Tag1, he is a great guy. He's the one that originally came up with coder years and years ago. I think he did it for Drupal 5 originally, I want to say. And coder is a great way. So coder is designed to work with PHP-CS for code sniffing. And the nice thing about that is that makes it very easy to integrate things like continuous integration. So we can very quickly have a CI run on every pull request, say, that does a coding standards review. And the nice thing is PHP-CS, of course, does the standard syntax checking and everything like that, but then it will also apply the Drupal coding standards, which are at this point rather extensive. So this is, and that link right there, the first link on the Drupal.org, is a great tutorial on exactly how to get that installed. Again, I could probably do a whole talk on this, so I don't want to go too deeply into it, given that we're, you know, what, 15 minutes from the end. I want to make sure I have enough time to talk to folks. But just by doing a compose require coder and the dealer direct PHP code sniffer and composer installer, what that does is that actually just does some of the backend stuff needed in order to integrate PHP CS with coder to make it work. Yes, we can consider doing that. I may drag somebody in on that because I vastly of my linting and sniffing files. Which may or may not be interesting to the audience here. I don't know. So I do a lot of management, but the techniques apply here as well. And this is one of the things I'd like to talk about. So even if you do nothing else other than PHP-CS and then using the command lines that are given you there on the Drupal.org tutorial link, you can just run that at any time. It will scan, you know, whatever files you tell it to scan, and it will tell you whether they comply, you know, whether they have any syntax errors, whether they comply with Drupal coding standards, all those goodies. So just doing that alone, a major level up that again will make you look very good. Oh, I see a hand raise. Is there something I missed? I don't see anything in chat.
No, we're just raising our hand because we want you to do a session on
okay,
code sniffing and linting.
Okay. So here's the extra credit. The extra credit is, and I don't know this person personally. He's in Italy, but his script that I linked there is very similar to one that I've written myself. So I'd like to give him credit because I think he wrote it before I did. I just happened to reinvent the wheel without ever having seen his work. And that is using pre-commit hooks. Pre-commit hooks are lovely things. And they're a little bit fidgety to set up. But once they're set up, they can save your butt, because what they will do is they do essentially what CI does on pull requests when you do a git commit. So the nice thing is you're doing your work, you're doing your thing. If you have a pre-commit hook set up, what'll happen is when you go to git commit, it's gonna see, Git will check to see if it has any pre-commit hooks. If it has a pre-commit hook, it will run that hook. And that hook could be PHP-CS check Drupal coder, which means and if it fails, your commit will not happen, which means it will save your butt, because if you did something accidentally, you don't want to commit that, because then it's in the, the Git history for all the world to see, and everybody's going to see it, and they're going to see all your mistakes. So this makes you look good to your coworkers, right? Because that little pre-commit hook will scan it and tell you, oh, hey, look, here are all your issues, allows you to fix them, add them, and then try the commit again. And when it passes, the commit goes through, which means every commit you do will conform to Drupal coding standards and should not have any syntax errors, at least as far as PHP-CS can detect locally. So it's a super, super nice thing. And it basically involves dropping a file into a certain spot in the .git directory of your local repo. It's a little fidgety because you do have to poke around in the .git directory and put it in the right place. And you will probably need to change some paths and things like that to fit your local environment. But it's a cool thing. There is also a tool called pre-commit. Yes, I will post the link to the starter files. Yes, I will also post a link to all of these slides, so you have every URL in them. And I think everything I talk about here has a link. And if it doesn't, I have my contact info at the end, and you can get a hold of me, and I will share it with you. Pre-commit is a framework that is it's a kind of a generic framework that allows you to add arbitrary commit hooks just by adding them to a YAML config file that says, hey, go grab this commit hook from here, go grab this commit hook from there, and run them all before a pre-commit. This is what I personally use when I work on my Ansible repos for infrastructure, because it's infrastructure paranoid. And anybody who's been to one of my talks before knows that infrastructure people are two things. We're lazy and we're paranoid. And so this does both for me, right? Because it does all the linting and work for me. And I'm paranoid. I don't want to accidentally push something up into my infrastructure repo that's going to break a server or 20. So what I've done in my pre-commit for my Ansible stuff is I use Ansible lint for linting my Ansible. Funny thing. It's a great tool, by the way. If anybody works with Ansible, Ansible lint is good stuff. It automatically runs an Ansible lint with a preset group of rules against every commit that I make against my Ansible repo before I push it. And it does it automatically, and all I had to do is check in a YAML file, and as long as I had pre-commit installed locally on my machine, it just works. So before I move on, do you have any questions about commit code sniffing, at least the very basics of code sniffing and commit hooks? And yes, I will talk to the D4G folks about possibly doing another talk. We'll see. Okay. Well, let me get on to my resources slide, which has a bunch of things on it. So a lot of these things I've already talked about. There are two things on here, however, that I would like to just mention in passing before we finish here. The first one is TIG. And for those of you who live on the command line like I do, TIG is a glorious thing. As a matter of fact, let me just pop over to my shell real quick and I'll show you exactly what TIG is. So TIG is a graphical viewer. It's a text-based viewer for Git, and it shows you the Git log. So you can go through and look at things. The really nice thing, okay, and it's nice because I don't have it here in this repo, and I don't have a repo that has a lot of merges and pulls in it that I can really show publicly. But it will actually show you the tree of how all the various branches interrelate to each other. So it's a sweet little tool. It's open source. You can install it from any number of package managers for whatever platform you're on, and it just works. And it saved me so much work. And the nice thing is, you can do stuff. You can also do things that a lot like you can do in Git. So you can do things like a TIG blame, which works a lot like a Git blame, except one, it gives you a nice interface. And two, you can do things like it will give you, you know, the commit, but then you can also see the diff of that commit. So I'm a big fan of TIG. It doesn't get nearly the attention it should, because it is a really great tool. And anybody who does a lot of work with Git on a command line, it's a good thing. The second thing is, I acknowledge not everybody is a command line diehard like I am. You know, I came out of the old Unix days in the late 90s or the early 90s. So yeah, we didn't have GUIs back then. And so I got used to working in Vim and things like that. But I acknowledge that not everybody works that way. And so, you know, if you're finding the Git command line frustrating, there are a ton of GUIs out there for Git. And a lot of them are very good. If you use GitHub, the GitHub one is actually excellent. But even the ones just for straight Git work pretty good. So I wanted to make sure to post a link to that in case there are people who are struggling with the Git command line work. And so then, yeah, the rest of these links I think are all things I pretty much talked about. GitHub Flow, there you'll see. So that's a much deeper dive into what GitHub Flow is as far as workflow goes. It's absolutely worth a read. It's not very long. And even if you don't adopt it entirely, the techniques that Scott talks about in there are very, very good to learn. And yeah, I think that's all the stuff I wanted to talk about. Yes. Ansible changes. Oh, okay. I will try not to diverge too off because now you're into my world. Generally, this is one of the applications where we still use Vagrant. On all my Ansible stuff, I have a Vagrant box that is configured with an image almost identical to my production servers. And so I test my Ansible against a Vagrant box before moving ahead. So it's similar in that way in that I do test on a local virtual environment. The other thing I can do, fortunately, is Ansible has a lovely -- check, which is a no-op, and it will run the particular role against whatever inventory you provided and tell you, you know, in a no-op situation, whether it would actually error or not. Let's see, anything else? Oh, I do need to, yes, I will post a link to the chat here for the repo. I don't have that one up in front of me, so actually here, I know I can get it. Actually, why am I can just share this. I don't know why. There we go. So I'll paste it into chat here as well. But yeah, if you do that'll get it. So that is that is my starter repo that I was using here for this particular demo, and you can play around with it. Oh, look at that. Oh, sorry about that. Somebody sent me a private message and now, there we go. I really got to watch that. Okay, so we have, let's see, we have about, what, 2 minutes left? So I guess I get the right amount of content. Are there other questions or comments or concerns or disappointment my office manager didn't show up?
This is a great presentation. Thank you so much. So much information. You definitely have to come back and share more.
Okay. Yes. Yes. And, you know, I was hoping to do this talk at Drupal GovCon or something related to it. We'll see if I can make it happen. Probably not this year, but I have done talks similar to this in past Drupal GovCons, and I intend to do so again. Hopefully we'll be able to meet in person again someday, because this talk is way more fun in person.
Well, thank you. Thank you again. And before people drop off, I just want to mention our webinar for August. It'll be given by Mike Madison, who is a manager and architect at Acquia, and he'll be presenting on future-proofing your site for Drupal 9. Again, thank you, Greg.
Thank you, everybody. I didn't hear any snoring, so I hope that means I actually kept people interested in talking. So thank you very much.
And everybody take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.